Welcome to the 5th program in our 2021 Sawtooth Forum and Lecture Series, Mountain Chronicles, brought to you by the Sawtooth Interpretive and Historical Association. I'm Haley Smalley, and I'm a naturalist at the Redfish Visitor Center and Gallery. I would like to take a moment first to acknowledge that in the Sawtooths we are located in the unceded and traditional lands of the Agadika and Dukudeka bands of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. We pay respect and honor to the tribes and to the land itself. This program is free of charge thanks to our primary sponsors, Redfish Lake Lodge and the McNichol family, in memory of Roland McNichol, who was an avid series attendee and a steward of the Sawtooths. We thank them for their continued support. As many of you know, the association is a member-based nonprofit. Our mission is to protect and advance the natural and cultural history of Idaho's Sawtooth Salmon River country through preservation and education. Our operations are funded by donations, grants, memberships, and book and map sales at our bookstores. We hope you will consider supporting us by making a donation tonight in our Sawtooth Bowl, using your credit card with our dip jar, purchasing a commemorative brick in your Pathway to Sawtooth History, entering to win our 2021 drawing for a spotting scope with smartphone adapter, or by becoming a member. And would any current members of CHA please raise your hands? Thank you all for your support. If you have any questions, find someone in one of our blue shirts after the program, and we will be happy to help. Tonight, I am excited to introduce Dr. Jen Pierce, presenting Climate Change in Idaho, Past, Present, and Future. Dr. Jen Pierce is an associate professor at Boise State in the Department of Geosciences, where she has worked since 2005. Her research focuses on wildfires, climate change, and landscape response. She's also committed to climate science education and outreach at the K-12 level. Dr. Pierce grew up in Colorado and Wyoming. She serves on the board of directors for the Friends of the Teton River and is the director of the Idaho Climate Literacy Education Engagement and Research Program. When she is not working, she enjoys mountain biking, backcountry skiing, playing music, and exploring the outdoors with her family. This evening, Dr. Pierce will present natural and human-caused changes in climate and address some of the primary effects of climate change in Idaho, using records of wildfire activity from the Stanley Basin and the South Fork Payette River as a lens to examine changes in wildfire, snowpack, and drought in the western USA. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jen Pierce.
Thank you so much, Haley. Let me know, do you want me to use the microphone? All right, I will use the microphone. Hello, how are you, Russ? It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and for attending. I know you have many choices, especially this weekend, of activities, and so I appreciate you taking time on a Friday at 5. All right, so I will get going. I know that there's going to be some graphics that you won't be able to see as well in the back, so just let me know. So please interrupt me at any time if you've got questions. So why am I here? How did I get here? Well, my story really, I am a third-generation geologist. My grandfather and my father were both geologists in the West, so I grew up in Western landscapes. I became a geologist somewhat by accident. I just kept taking classes at Colorado College and liking them because of the field trips. So perhaps similar to many of you, I love being in our Western landscapes. So that's really what brought me here today. My research is in wildfires. So I've been studying wildfires. I did my dissertation research on the South Fork Payette, researching wildfires starting in 2000. So 2000 through 2004, I was up camping out on the South Fork Payette. Probably fortunately at that time, I certainly did not know how to kayak, or else I wouldn't have gotten anything done. And I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I can circle back to it if people are interested, because I've got a lot to cover. Right now, I have a couple of really interesting research projects. You may have seen on Monday, I guess, in the Statesman, apparently it was the front page of the Statesman, I didn't see that part, some research that I'm working on soils. So I'm studying how inorganic carbon, aka caliche, aka the stuff when you're trying to dig a pit, you might say, gosh darn it, how do I get through this hard white stuff? Well, it turns out that hard white stuff is calcium carbonate, and it is actually storing carbon dioxide in our soils. So that is an area of active research I have right now in Reynolds Creek, in the Owyhees, and in Kimberly, Idaho. So I have a new NSF project in that area. I also have a new NSF project in increasing diverse leadership in the geosciences. Geosciences is the least diverse of all the STEM fields, and it really hasn't changed in 40 years. So we're working to change that. And we were excited, our family, just to welcome my new PhD student, and she came all the way from Pakistan to start her PhD at Boise State. So that's part of my research. But really, what I've been devoting a lot of my time to, really since 2016, is on K through 12 climate education. And I've worked on the Idaho State standards for many years, trying to get climate change into our K through 12 standards. And I'm doing that because I have 2 kids in the Idaho school system, and they are not getting the knowledge and tools they need to succeed in our changing future. I would compare this, so that's them a couple years ago in our dog Camus, and it's great to have them and my husband here tonight to hear this talk, so thanks for coming. My analogy here with the ship is that if you knew that your kids or your grandkids had to sail an old-fashioned sailing ship across the Pacific when they graduated high school, you'd be really busy. You'd be training them how to navigate, you'd be training them how to repair boats, you'd be training them how to meet this challenge, right? This is my analogy for our climate challenge. It's a big challenge, right? We need to understand what is causing climate change, and we need to understand what our solutions are. So that is what we need our kids to be learning in school. And so if you'd like to learn more about my work in K through 12 education, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. This is another reason why I started this work. So sorry, the font is a little small. This is from the Yale Climate Communications Center. This is the percentage of adults who think that climate change is happening. This is in 2020. And the warm colors, so oranges, show you that yes, indeed, most people in the US actually do think that climate change is happening. Now the blue colors show below 50%. This map shows percent of adults who think that scientists think global warming is happening. Okay, so yes, you're like, what? So most people, yes, they say, okay, you know, climate change is happening, we agree on that, but they don't think that scientists think climate change is happening. And I know we've got a great fisheries biologist back here, Russ, who I'm sure if I asked Russ, he would agree that yes indeed, by taking 30 years of water temperature measurements plus, you can tell me that climate change is absolutely happening. Then this is the percentage of adults who think global warming is caused by human activities. So again, these are the maps that show us our perceptions in the US. And if you're interested in looking at these, just go to the Yale Climate Communications and these amazing graphics will pop up. So just to flip through these once more, most people think climate change is happening. Most people do not think that scientists think climate change is happening. And most people are unsure as to the effect of human activities. So this is, as a scientist, over 97% of scientists agree that climate change is happening and it's human caused. There is more consensus and more correlation between humans emitting CO2 and climate change than there is between smoking a pack a day and getting lung cancer. Okay. So that should put this in perspective. The likelihood that CO2 is increasing and it's not due to human activities is 1 over 10 to the 85th power. That's 1 over 10 with 85 zeros after it. That's about the same likelihood that I would pick up a grain of sand from along the river here, put it down on any planet in our solar system, and Sabine would happen to pick up that same grain of sand. So that's how likely that CO2 is increasing naturally, and we're going to go through this in a minute. So clearly we've got something to work on here in terms of scientific communication about climate change. And here's my movie reference. So what we have here is a failure to communicate. So that's why I'm out here. I'm hoping I can communicate. So I'm going to talk about climate change specifically in Idaho and the challenges and opportunities we have to address climate change in Idaho's ecosystem. So first I'm going to provide a short background on the effects of changing climate, and then we'll talk about wildfires, snowpack, water, and ecosystems. So this is just an animation showing the changes in Earth's temperature over time. Let me get this going. And so here we have the years. This is the late 1800s. So again, the warmer colors are warmer temperatures. We're going to get into the Dust Bowl here in a little bit, so you can see it got warmer for a bit there. Then generally cooler temperatures in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. This is when we were really good at putting out fires, by the way. And now mid-80s, we see a change. That is really when we see a change in wildfire activity. And you can see that, and there's a newer animation. This is from NOAA, or NASA, excuse me. And you can see that our temperatures have indeed warmed, especially in our polar regions. This next animation is complicated, but it is the most often requested figure I get from all my talks. So let me just take a second to explain this. Feel free to come up closer if you need to. What this shows right over here are changes in carbon dioxide in parts per million. So this is 340 parts per million. The blue dot is always the South Pole. The red dot is always Mauna Loa. So you can see that over time we're getting more and more recording stations recording changes in CO2 over time. So that's what's being shown by these little dots. And you can see them popping up on this map. Over here we see two trends in carbon dioxide. So we're going from 340, now we're at 360. This is in 1990. So does someone want to identify one trend? The overall trend is what? Up. Okay, good. Now there's another trend here. You see the seesaw pattern. Anyone know what that is from? Annie. The seasons. Very good. So she's seen this talk before. Excellent. So in the springtime, it was because we have more land mass in the northern hemisphere. Our trees and grasses, of course, suck up that carbon dioxide. In the fall, when that organic matter decays, it's released. So that's a seasonal signal. Now, hold on to your hats. We're going to go really quickly back in time. So now we've been going forward, and this doesn't go to 2021. But latest measurements were about 416 parts per million as of February 2021. So it's actually higher than you're going to see on this graph. In a second, we're going to go back to Ernest Keeling's groundbreaking data from Mauna Loa. So Keeling was really the first scientist to accurately document that CO2 was increasing in the atmosphere. He was interested in the seasonal trends initially, and he would go out and he'd check his data every year, and he'd say, gosh, I think there's something wrong with my instruments. The annual average is going up every year. And he rechecked his instruments, and sure enough, he was right. So this is Ernest Keeling's data from Mauna Loa. Now we're going to go back over time, glacial, interglacial cycles from little bubbles of carbon dioxide preserved in ice cores. So this is the Law ice core data. This is 1000 AD, 500 AD. And so now we can see our pre-industrial carbon dioxide measurements of about 278 parts per million. Now we're going to go back through our ice ages, 8,000 years, 10,000 years, 15,000 years, 20,000 years. So there were mammoths and mastodons roaming around, Pleistocene giant beavers in the Sawtooth River, 40,000 years ago, 60,000 years ago. These are orbital changes in CO2. So when someone says, you know, the climate's always been changing. This must be part of a natural cycle. Yes, the climate has been changing, but these are our natural signals. This is where we are now. This is the natural signal. That is where we have been. And these are all from ice core measurements. I'm going to see if I can pause this for a second. So our ice, during the ice ages, our atmospheric CO2 was about 185 parts per million. Pre-industrial, so before the Industrial Revolution, about 278 parts per million in our atmosphere. And now we're over 416 parts per million. The main thing I do when I do K through 12 education is something called greenhouse gas tag. The point of greenhouse gas tag is, you guys ready? Carbon dioxide traps heat. I'm going to say it and you're going to say it. Carbon dioxide traps heat.
Carbon dioxide traps heat.
Okay, that is how the greenhouse effect works in a nutshell. If you went out and asked 300 people up at the music festival, maybe one or two of them might be able to tell you that. So most people don't ever learn this in school. So carbon dioxide traps heat. We've known that for over 100 years. Actually, the first person to discover this was a woman named Eunice Foote. She has not gotten the credit she deserves for this. She discovered the trapping effect of carbon dioxide by measuring it in her kitchen in mason jars. So for over 100 years, we have known that carbon dioxide traps heat. If we had no carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, the Earth would be like Mars, right? It'd be very cold. So it's a good thing to have some greenhouse gases, but at this point, we have way too much, right? So again, these are the natural cycles. This is where we are now. I got into several, what will we call them, discussions with your elected representative from Stanley, Dorothy Moon, about this topic. So if you see Dorothy at the grocery store, you can, relay this to her, that these are the natural cycles and this is where we are now. All right. Climate and wildfire over the last 10,000 years in Idaho. So again, this is what I studied in the South Fork Payette, and let me do a little time check here. And this is actually a picture of some of my graduates and undergraduates from the Pioneer Fire in 2016. So this is right up on Clear Creek. A lot of what I study is fire-related erosion. Idaho is a great place to study fire-related erosion. You've got your very erodible Idaho batholith, and you have lots of fires. I'm picking on Russ, but Russ has done some great work on this. It's very important, of course, to have sediments in our streams for fish. But what I was really interested in was these changes in wildfire over the last 10,000 years. So we have done this with my students and colleagues in many different spots in Idaho. So City of Rocks, the Sawtooths, South Fork Payette, North Fork Boise, over in, we have a couple of records from the Mountain Home area, the Boise front. And we compared these with some other records from down in New Mexico from my advisor Grant Meyer's work. So if you really want to geek out, we have lots of papers about this work. How did we reconstruct fires over 10,000 years? That'd be a good question to be asking yourself right now, right? Well, a lot of digging, for one thing, and finding little tiny pieces of charcoal. So if you find a layer of sediment in alluvial sediments, so these are in mostly what are called alluvial fans. You could also find them in stream sediments sometimes. So you have deposits that contain these little pieces of charcoal. If you have lots of charcoal, that means there was a fire, and a fire-related debris flow. The other great thing about charcoal is you can radiocarbon date it. So you can send it off to a group of really smart physicists with a mass spectrometer and a mass accelerator, and they can determine the age of that fire. Now you can't determine it to the exact year, but it would be like telling you that I am 50 years old plus or minus 20 years, right? So we'll give you an average. So then by combining hundreds of these radiocarbon ages, we can come up with records of how fires have changed over time. Some of the big summary from the South Fork Payette is in this Nature paper from 2004. And these are complicated graphs, so what I'll explain to you is that in the South Fork Payette Ponderosa, we see frequent fires in the past when it was relatively cool and wet. So there were frequent fires in the Payette Ponderosa, but there were really no fires here in Stanley, and there were really no fires in Yellowstone. And you all know that who's tried to light a campfire when it's cold and wet? All right, you know about how well that works, right? To start a fire when it's cold and wet. So that's how it has worked over time in the past. If you have really cold, wet times, like the Little Ice Age, you're not going to get a big fire. But you might get these frequent fires in the Ponderosa pines. However, during times in the past when it has been really warm and dry, and also variable. So you have warm, dry decades, you have a couple of really wet years. You can see this is the perfect recipe, right, to get a big fire. You have both the fuel loads and you have the dry conditions. It turns out we had a time like this in the past called the medieval climatic anomaly. The medieval climatic anomaly, we had we see records of large stand replacing fires in both the Idaho Ponderosa and in Yellowstone and Sawtooth lodgepole pine. So during that warm, dry period, we were seeing extensive fires in all sorts of ecosystems. So the reason this is important is you hear often on the news, oh, you know, Ponderosa never has had big stand replacing fires. It's only because we suppressed fires that we have these big fires in Idaho Ponderosa. That is not what the historic records show. What the historic records show is that in Ponderosa pines there were big stand replacing fires when it was warm and dry. So I always joke with people that I went to school for 12 years after high school to tell you that you get really big fires when it's warm and dry, right? I bet you all knew that already, but we proved it, right, with lots of expensive radiocarbon dating. So that is exactly what our records in the past show. Now, of course, it's more complicated than that, and one of the reasons it's more complicated is that, so who can name a major tree species around Redfish Lake? Lodgepole pine. And they've been there forever, right? Good job, Ed. Yeah. They've been there forever. They have not been there forever. Kathy Whitlock has some work from pollen data from lakes up in the Sawtooth that the pines have really only been here for the last about 4,000 years. So these fire-prone pines are, say that 10 times fast, fire-prone pines are pretty new to our landscapes, geologically speaking. So, of course, vegetation plays a role as well, and I can go into that if we have time and people are interested. Okay. This morning when we woke up in Boise, it was really smoky, and so this is the smoke and fire map from today. And you can see that Idaho is on fire. So we have a lot of fires in Idaho, of course. You would have to be living under a rock to not know that this is yet another severe fire season in the western U.S. So now we're going to move into I talked a little bit about fires in the past. We're going to talk about fires now. How's everyone doing? All right, you're good. Federal agencies now spend $2 to $3 billion annually, way over 50% of the Forest Service budget. And this number needs, I'm sure when we get our updated numbers, this is going to be quite a bit higher. The estimated cost to society, $60 to $90 billion annually. So not chump change. This is a new paper from a colleague of mine at Boise State, Moji. Moji and his colleagues, I think Charlie Luce is actually a co-author on this paper as well. Western fires are burning higher in the mountains, and they're burning at unprecedented rates. So unprecedented and certainly within our historic records. So right here where we're sitting. These are the types of forests. So again, you know, if you imagine yourself back in the Little Ice Age, if you imagine yourself back in the last glacial times, there were giant glaciers coming down from these mountains. Snow could easily have been covering at certainly parts of the mountains, even now. That is not the case anymore. So typically these forests were too wet and too cold to burn. That has changed. So that is a very clear climate signal. When you get into lower elevations, and I'm going to go through some of that data, you get into populated areas, then it is much more of a management, human use, human fire starts signal. But up here in these mountains, the reason we have these large extensive fires now is a climate signal. This is the scientific paper that I was just referenced in that previous slide, Warming Enabled Upslope Advance in Western U.S. Forest Fires. So again, highlighting that this is the case, and this is the case in Idaho. All right. Thinning. Well, we need to go thin out that brush. Good luck in these types of forests, right? So again, that might be a good option, and certainly around your homes, there's a lot you can do to fireproof your homes. But to go out and thin the Sawtooth forest, that would be a tall order, right? The lodgepole pines grow, they called them dog hair stands of lodgepole pine, right? So that's, they naturally grow right next to each other. If you've ever tried to bushwhack through them, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So thinning is really not an option in many of our forests. So another great paper here on fire from some Idaho colleagues, so John Abatsoglu and Park Williams. This was from 2016, demonstrating that human-caused climate change has caused over half of the documented increases in fuel aridity since the 1970s, and doubled the cumulative forest fire area since 1984. Wow. So what can we do about this, right? Sometimes I leave this for the end, but I'm going to take a little break here in the middle and talk about it. Because that's exactly what we need to do, is talk about it. Every time you hear about fires on the news, the word climate change should be with that news story. Climate change-driven fires in California, fires driven by climate change in Idaho. But do you hear that? No, you don't. So the first thing is we need to make this association, and we need to talk about it. So raise your hand if you have talked about climate change today. Today. Maybe more of you have, because you're like, I'm going to this talk. Okay, so the number one thing you can do as a solution is talk about it. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes to talk about it. So I'd like you to make a friend or turn to the person next to you and talk about what does climate change look like in Idaho. That's one thing you could talk about. You could talk about your favorite climate change solution. So, all right, let's all talk about it in 3 minutes. pick on you guys. What about you, Connor?
I would probably say education, because I feel like, especially like in the South and the Midwest, like where I'm from, that's not in the curriculum at all.
Yeah.
So I think education is a big aspect.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Great ideas. I just heard some great ideas. Yes, Russ.
So can you put it in context for us where the biggest bang for the buck is? You know, is it transportation? Is it alternative energy for heating homes and things? Is it eliminating methane leaks on existing oil and gas sites? You know, I'm sure it's all of it, but...
Yes, the answer is yes. So all of the above. And that's maybe the silver lining of addressing climate change, is there are hundreds and hundreds of solutions. So I'm going to pick on just a few folks who I talked to. So is it Marianne? Is that right? So Marianne talked about fireproofing her cabin out here and making sure that all the duff was cleared and she had an evacuation plan in place, and also that there's so much down timber, it was really hard to walk where you used to be able to walk along the creek. So, Connor, do you want to shout out what you said?
I said incorporating it into education and curriculum.
Education and curriculum. Yeah. And I didn't get your name. I'm going to pick on you though.
Yeah, I'm Isabel.
Isabel, what was your solution?
I mean, I have lots of them, but the huge ones are our day-to-day lives, how we recycle, what we put into our mouths, taking the bike instead of the car. Those are the...
Excellent. So recycling, your what you eat is about 30% of your individual carbon footprint. So limiting meat and dairy really cuts down on your personal carbon footprint. And eating local. So excellent. Any other solutions or thoughts that people talked about? Yes.
It's not a solution, but I've been confused by this move to electricity for cars, and but we're still using power for electricity. So how is that balancing out?
So great point. So that with moving to electric cars, that gives us at least the option that electricity is coming from wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, probably not geothermal, but so other options other than fossil fuels. So does that mean that the energy that you're using to charge your Tesla is not coming from coal? No, it doesn't mean that necessarily, but it makes the option of renewables available. So that you're not, so that, and as that becomes more and more widely available, then we will become much less reliant on putting fossil fuels into our gas tanks. So great question.
I'd like to turn to the Forest Service as a big problem, and ask how do we deal with them, because their culture now is reinforced by fire management, provides them with incentives for fire because most of their income comes from fighting fires. And so how do we change the Forest Service and other land management agencies who misconstrue what's going on and try and blame things that aren't the cause, like fuels, instead of climate change, high temperatures, winds, low humidity?
So that's a great point, and I would say, and I would defend my friends. You know, Brian Anderson was a graduate of our department, and he was your district ranger here. And then I've got other folks actually in the audience who are employees or former employees of the Forest Service that they are likely responding, of course, to top-down mandates, so that they don't have as much control over that. But yes, I think that if I could wave my magic wand and say, from this point forward, we will be investigating solutions that are longer-term solutions, not just thinning, for example, but what should be growing, given the changing climate, what should be growing on these slopes? Should we be, I'm not saying we should, but should we be planting ponderosa pine? I found a ponderosa by Redfish Lake. Should there be more of them? I don't know. So I don't know the answer to that, but those are the questions I think that the scientists in the Forest Service should be exploring. Yeah, Russ?
Yeah, I don't want to pretend to represent the Forest Service. I work for the Rocky Mountain Station. There are lots of great scientists within the Forest Service. One I'll mention is Paul Hesper, and he has spent his career trying to educate folks both within the Forest Service and outside about the change in climate and what's changed in our forests and those kinds of things. So there's really good people within the agency that are trying to do that. However, having said that, over the last 20 years at the station, while the fire budget has gone like this, we've lost 40% of our scientists. So we're now down to less than 1% of the Forest Service budget is spent on research, which is a definite. The other thing I just recently heard, there was a story on NPR about the fires in California, and they had a clip of one of the representatives from California. He was actually crying, and he was lamenting how the federal government let these people down because they couldn't put these fires out. So you have this really ignorant understanding what's actually happening. You know, it's the climate change that's forcing the evacuation of these towns and the burning up of these communities, not the lack of money for Forest Service, fire suppression. And the last thing, there was a recent conference between President Biden and the Western governors, and unfortunately one of the big items that came out of that was more money for fire suppression. You know, so we're still treating the symptoms instead of the root cause.
Exactly. That summed it up really nicely. So thank you. And that is, so I think these are all things that I want all of us to be talking about more, right? And your comment over here, yeah, Biden needs to be doing more for climate change. Yes, I mean he's doing certainly more than we saw previously, but it could always be definitely always be improved. And Russ's comment that we need these research scientists doing good research. So yes.
Don't you think the problem is that it's a lot of this is politically driven instead of scientifically driven?
Absolutely.
And that's a big problem.
Absolutely. And there's a great series of YouTubes that I put together from a conference last year on climate change and the coronavirus. And you really, there's not a lack of data. The data is very clear on climate change. So there's really, I can do another study on wildfires and show you, yes, again, that warmer, drier conditions cause more fires. I could do that, but we already know that. What we need to learn more about is the psychology, honestly, and what is the psychology of why people are denying climate change. And it gets to what a Harvard economist actually called pain. People respond to pain. They respond to things that are personal, abrupt, immoral, and now. So climate change, for a lot of people, does not fit those criteria. It's not going to, it'll affect future generations. It's not, it's not really happening. It's not happening now. The other thing I've experienced personally with talking about this topic with lots of people is that sometimes your most adamant climate deniers are people who actually care a lot about the planet, believe it or not, and the reality is too much. So it is much easier, and Steve Running, who's a scientist at University of Montana, describes this, the 5 stages of climate grief. And denial is a very powerful stage of climate grief. Oh, this is too hard, I don't want to think about it, must not be happening. Or maybe it's happening, but we don't have anything to do with it. So it's psychologically fascinating and beyond my pay grade, really, to understand how it's happening. But so what can we do? And I'm running short on time, so I'm gonna summarize these pretty quickly. So I was asked several years ago to talk about the opportunities presented by climate change. So I kept, so this was for the state legislature. So, but I kept that wording, but we do have the opportunity to reduce human-caused fires. Okay, so that is something we certainly can do. This was the Table Rock fire right around Boise, started by fireworks. The fire a couple years ago in Hood River also started by fireworks, jumped the Columbia River, which is a mile wide at that location. So that is certainly something we can do. This is ignitions in Idaho since 1980. Here you can see the human ignitions are in blue. Natural ignitions are in green. This has actually shifted since we put these maps together. So now it's more like 50-50. So these maps were put together in 2015. In the last 5 to 6 years, now human ignitions are almost half of our ignitions in Idaho. So still, of course, we have our lightning-caused ignitions, especially in areas like this, but we can certainly reduce those human ignitions, especially in our sagebrush steppe ecosystems. This is really important. And like this fire we were talking about that's burning down in Haley right now, if you have a brush fire, we actually have a prayer of putting that out. We have a friend who flies one of those giant planes, what's it called? Tanker plane. And what he said was that once fires got beyond 5 acres, even with that giant plane, he said it was like pissing on a bonfire, is what he said. So for a forest fire. But he said range fires, they can put out range fires, okay? So that is something, that is certainly something we can do, we can work on. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Again, a lot to cover. So start date. So really, when you're looking at the human-caused fires, they are extending the fire season. And these breaks are artificial. They're because of reporting issues. So don't look at those. But if you look at the overall trend, really, it's cutting down on those human-caused fires in the fall. Here in Stanley, when you don't have natural lightning, and in the spring, so the snow is melting earlier off our landscapes. Smoke. Where are the Sawtooths again? So the #1 effect of climate change on our health is smoke. Wildfire smoke accounts for 320,000 deaths annually, globally. So and wildfire smoke is actually very hard to quantify. So because you might die a year later, but maybe it's from respiratory failure during a smoke incident. So smoke. Our smoke wave days in Idaho, this is greater than 20 more days per year as compared to 1979 through 2000. So we're experiencing much smokier conditions, as you all know. This affects our river runners, this affects our outfitters, this affects our health right here, right now, today. Our local pharmacies in Idaho, in Boise, are running out of inhalers during smoky episodes. All right. So quickly going to talk about water. So our challenge here, increased spring and summer temperatures are melting the snow off our landscapes earlier. All of our skiers, all of you who live in Stanley know that firsthand. Once that snow melts off, then our vegetation starts drying and we have a longer fire season. So longer spring and summers. I gave a talk up here a couple years ago for the White Bark Pine Association. There are pine beetles then have a lot more opportunity to reproduce because there's they need really cold temperatures to kill the larvae, which you're just not getting up here in Stanley anymore. So increased insect outbreaks. So we know it's going to get warmer. This is the projected change in temperature. Precipitation is tricky. Okay, so precipitation may increase a little bit, but really what is important for our ecosystems here in Idaho is the precipitation in the summer. And if it's going to be getting warmer in the summer, more evaporation, so even if we have more precip in the winter, that might be tricky to deal with. Snow change. This is from Charlie Luce's work. This is projected snow change for 2080. This is minus 100%. That means no snow. So when we look at our coastal ranges and our lower elevation mountains here, it's not looking good. Low flows are going to be getting lower. So again, if we're thinking about this is Dan Isaac's work, that reduced summer flows, are really challenging for our fish. And more variable conditions. If you are the water manager for Lucky Peak, you have a really, really hard job. Last year was really wet, this year's really dry. So more variable conditions. So again, that's exactly what we've experienced the last couple years. That makes it very hard for our agricultural, for our farmers, right? If you don't know what's going to be happening year to year, it makes it hard to know when to plant. Also, the number of consecutive dry days will also increase. So again, a big challenge for our agricultural communities. Ecological response to climate change. So again, more fires. We've talked about that a lot. But what will grow back after those fires? Will we actually get, so especially our lower elevation ponderosa pine forests, will those trees grow back? So that's called non-replacement and non-linear response to climate change. Reduced habitat for Salmonids. So again, if you have questions about this, you should ask Russ, because he is an expert in this topic. So there's, and this I gave this for the Henry's Fork Foundation, which is why they have Rob Van Kirk referenced here. So reduced habitat for our cold-loving fish species and other cold adapted species like moose. All right. So what opportunities do we have here? And I can feel the pressure dropping, so we might all have to. Is it starting to rain? Thank you. I'm okay. Oh, thank you. That was very nice. Right there. Idaho has no coal. None. Zero coal. Economic coal. We have everything else. Come on under the tent if you need it. So we have wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, and small-scale nuclear. So what is our other opportunity? The biggest one, take-home message for you guys here, living here. We have got to preserve our pristine environments, because this will be what our species need to survive in a changing future. They're going to need to be able to move up and down in elevation, mostly up, to adjust to these changes. Another opportunity is our next generation of Idahoans. So again, getting back to that education component, we have the opportunity to teach our kids about the effects of climate change. And so if you have questions about that part, you can ask me about i-CLEER, which is the Idaho Climate Literacy Education Engagement and Research Group. So the point of i-CLEER is really to connect researchers at the universities with educators, provide our educators with the tools they need to teach about climate change, and provide the next generation of Idahoans what they need to succeed in their changing future. So if you have any questions about that, definitely let me know. And I do have extra slides about the data on the South Fork Payette fires, but I know folks are probably needing to check their car windows, so yes. All right, yes, questions?
How do we convince adults who need education?
Yeah, like
our state legislature.
Especially.
Well, you can convince them when you go to...
Dorothy Moon.
Oh yeah, I know Dorothy Moon very well.
We only have to convince half plus one.
Yeah, so it's really, there are, I would say, because I've worked closely with the state legislature, there's about 7 seats that really need to change, including Dorothy Moon's seat.
You mentioned that we're at 416 parts per billion in the atmosphere now.
Yeah.
Dioxide. What's the tipping point? Are we approaching that, or?
Well, 2 degrees is the global tipping point.
What parts per million are going to get us there?
You know, it's tricky because our ocean has been absorbing a lot of that CO2 for a long time and kind of buffering. That we need to take action right now, and all the different fronts. So yeah, yes.
So I don't want to be ignorant to assume this isn't happening, but is there any engagement with the theological community? Because we're from eastern Idaho, and it's a very strong ideology there that, you know, God can make it all right. And I just wonder if there's an engagement with that community to say, you know, let's leverage their belief in you know, stewardship of the planet.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, Catherine Hayhoe is a really wonderful speaker. She's a climate scientist, and she's an evangelical Christian. And she has amazing talks on that subject. So Catherine Hayhoe, she has a new book that I haven't read that just came out. Her message really is one of stewardship. That from her perspective, God gave us stewardship over the earth. That we have figured out that we are changing our Earth's climate, and therefore to be good stewards of God's creation, then we need to take responsibility and action for that. And there are quite a few now groups that are following that lead. So that's a great question.
So there are many, many parallels between the climate change issue and salmon and steelhead recovery. And one of the clear ones is people that ignore the data and say the fish are doing fine, just like they ignore the science of climate change. But then on the other side are people that say it's too late, we're going to lose the fish. So similarly, people are saying, well, even if we do things right now, it's going to be too late to save the planet. So how do you respond to that?
That's not an option. Too late is not an option. I've got my 2 kids sitting here. I want them to be able to come backcountry skiing just like I have. That is not an option. Too late is not an option. So, yeah. I'm not going to accept that.
Is this slide still online so that we can review it and refer other people to it?
Lynn has a copy of the slideshow on her, so we can make sure that that's available to folks. So, yes, thank you.
One more real quick one, Jen. Lodgepole pine came on the scene 4,000 years ago. What did they replace? What species did they replace?
So if I had to be a tree, I would be a Doug fir. So the Doug fir has been on the landscapes both here. Also, the ponderosa pine on the South Fork Payette is also a newcomer. The pinyon pine down at City of Rocks, also a newcomer. The pines are new to these landscapes. What was there before? Doug fir. As far as we can tell. It's hard because the pollen, you can't tell specific species as well, but certainly Doug fir was here. So I know, pretty cool. Yes?
Bill Gates wrote a book full of data suggesting how to deal with each of the options as a matter of policy. It's a surprisingly good book. I would not have expected it, and it's worth getting if you want to decide what policy options there are, because he prices out the costs of each potential intervention, upsides and downsides, and it's data rich.
Yes, and I have that book, and it is a great book. Go figure that Bill Gates wrote a really smart book. But and so what this gets at, and there's another great tool for that. It's called En-ROADS, and I do this with my class. And so then you can actually, it's a data-driven model where you can change the knobs on different changes in energy source, for example, and policy, and actually see the results. And I agree. And so that's the thing, is we have the data. We have great data. We just need to act. And so that's what needs to happen. And you've got to get people to listen. So from now on, all of you are going to bring climate change up every day. We're going to register all the raft guides to vote. Right? Register them to vote here, right? Can we do that? I mean, why not? Go ask them.
Dorothy lives in Twin Falls.
So
she's elected here.
I know. So I think that Stanley, that you people care. You're in these mountains because you care. So that's what should be reflected. So thank you so much for inviting me.